Okay, so Melissa was just saying she's having, what a lot of pretty much every agent will encounter most likely at the beginning of their business. And it's just a little bit of a reluctance to get on the telephone, right? And it could be because you're building up your confidence. It could be because you aren't, you either don't know what to say or haven't said it enough. It's hard to get all the right words out at the right moment. And what she suggested, or she asked is, is it possible that instead of calling these people from the open house, you write them a note? And yeah, I think that's a great strategy. I think that those notes should be placed in the mail first thing Monday morning, no question, because we don't want them to get the note. You don't want to write the note on, let's say, Thursday, and then they get the note the following Monday. They could be under contract by that time, right? So you want to get that stuff to them ASAP. And she asked I don't know if she picked these words specifically for this, but she said, it's easier sometimes to write the note than it is to make the call. Can I?
Oh no, I meant to say that.
Okay, can I coach you on that in front of everyone?
Yeah, please.
Okay, you're right. It is easier. That's not the right question, though. The right question is it what's likely going to work better? Right. So yes, I agree. That is a component of the follow-up, is a handwritten note. I think that unfortunately the handwritten notes are not as common as they once were. Okay, and I think you will stand out if you do that. But my encouragement is don't let that replace the phone call. Or if I can be really blunt with you, several phone calls, several video texts, several emails, several pokes, chasing them down on social media, whatever you got to do, because that lead is hot. And if you don't get them in a couple of days, you're not going to probably get them. So don't be afraid to like push it a little bit with them. I'm not saying help them do something they shouldn't do, obviously. I'm just talking about showing them that you're maniacal about follow-up. Because if they see that's the way you behave when they don't even have a relationship with you, technically, at least not legally, wait to see what kind of version of Melissa they get when you are committed contractually. And if somebody's like, hey, you're calling me a lot, say, look, I got to tell you, the average realtor out there is not so good. And I don't want you to end up in the hands of an average realtor. So that's the only reason why I'm pursuing you the way I'm pursuing you. That is the type of realtor you're looking for, right? Right? If they say, no, that's actually not the type of realtor I'm looking for, say, wonderful, I wish you the best. No big deal. I'm not going to be a fit for everybody. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Ben Kinney, who's the #1 agent in all of Keller Williams, he calls it the 10 days of pain. I will get you, I mean, he's literally calling, or his team is calling, emailing, texting, social media, poking, whatever you got to do, LinkedIn them. That's even a verb. Whatever you got to do, they need to know who you are. This is your audition, basically. Okay. All right, beautiful. All right, let's do what we did last time earlier this week. With respect to the buyer's day, like best practices for the buyer. I'm going to make a little list in front of me here on the seller topics that you would like to talk about. There is one in particular that I want to spend a couple minutes on, but is there anyone here that has seller questions, or they're having a hard time with part of the process, or scripting, or setting appropriate expectations? Walk me through what you guys are struggling with right now.
Hey, Bill, I'll share.
All right.
So when you have a seller and you get a contract, and the contract, just say, for instance, they decide to back out, just, I guess, maybe building that confidence back within the listing, for them to say, hey, I think I'm just gonna stay because that didn't go through.
So you're saying the buyer backed out? Why did the buyer back out?
Inspection issues, maybe it's supposed to be a flip or so. The return on the flip for the investor just wasn't there.
Oh, so holding it is going to make that better?
What would you say?
So holding it without any revenue is going to make that loss better.
I guess, from the seller perspective, like, hey, this didn't work out, so obviously I just need to hold on to it.
So I would say there's probably two approaches that I would use in this situation. The first is a line which maybe people will think this is a little hokey pokey, but I believe in it, which is, look, everything works out the way it's supposed to work out, right? If the buyer didn't get the right home, it's because there's a better one out there. If the deal fell through, it's because somebody else should own the home, right? And that type of like faith, if you want to call it faith, God, it's such a more relaxing way to run a business, right? Because if
Right,
you're
but
not,
if the seller decides that they don't want to sell anymore because
yeah,
just
I'm
one
getting to
deal.
that. I'm
Okay.
getting to that. It's such a more relaxing way to run your business because you don't try to hyper analyze every little thing that could have happened or what you did right or wrong or what they did right or wrong. It will just eat you alive if you let it. You got to make sure you're protecting your brain. Okay. So sometimes I will say something like that. Hey, look, what I've always found is that it always seems to work out exactly the way it's supposed to. So my guess is that this buyer just wasn't the right buyer for whatever reason. And the theme of the next part of what I'm about to say is the following, which is I am in the business to have clients for life. Okay. So, and you may have to actually state that very, very clearly to your people. So they're talking about the immediate, like, kind of aftermath of a deal dying. And you're wanting to use this as an opportunity to cement the relationship. Okay. So I would go right back to the very beginning and I would say, oh my gosh, I'm sorry that this happened. It's not uncommon in our marketplace right now. And, what I've found is that oftentimes it works out like this for a better reason. So, and then they say, well, I don't want to sell anymore. Say, okay, I understand that. So tell me a little bit let's go back to your original motivation and just get them talking about why they wanted to do the thing in the first place, right? Because oftentimes if they're going to buy a home for holding and renting, they look at the numbers differently than if they're going to buy a home to flip it. So if this home was bought and analyzed from the respective, I'm going to flip this home, then the numbers might not work out to stick a renter in, right? And if they say, well, I'll wait for the market to catch up with it, then they could have months and months and months of no revenue. So I would just go back to, I wouldn't push them hard because again, you don't want to break the relationship, but I would go back to the motivation and say, hey, a week ago, you wanted to sell this property. So, and the reason why you wanted to sell this property was boom, 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 boom. So I just wanted to check in with you. Has anything substantial happened in the last, week in your life or your financial world that is causing you to change your mind? Right? I didn't say change your mind. I said change your mind. Right? It was an upswing. I'm creating curiosity. Make sense? So, so you're trying to make sure they don't react to that buyer leaving the deal in a way that is so emotional that it covers up the original motivation. Now, if she were to say, you know what, I just can't handle this market, I don't want to participate in it. Say, I hear you. Do you mind if I share some concerns about that with you? If you have some concerns. Otherwise, you say, hey, listen, oftentimes there is something that we should be looking for to either happen in the future or to not happen in the future that will cause us to re-examine where we're at today with the possibility and really the likelihood that we'll put it back on the market. Are you able to kind of help me understand what that might be? Right? Are we waiting for like the holidays? Are we waiting for somebody to be born, somebody to die, somebody to get married, somebody to get divorced? Are we waiting for the weather to change? What are we waiting for? Because the second it happens, I'm going to call you. And if they can't tell you what they're waiting for, they're in the middle of an emotional experience and they need to let that die down. And then you can go back and have a logical conversation. Does that make sense? Because if
Yeah,
their reasoning is I felt like it, they're being emotional. And we just have to let that, kind of fade away a little bit. And then we have more of a reasonable, logic-based discussion on what this person wants to do with their asset that a week ago they didn't want anymore. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, any other thoughts or questions on that from anybody? Again, the theme here is I want clients for life. No commission check is worth me pushing you when you don't want to be pushed. I will make 1,000 times more money if I just do the right thing. And I just go back to their motivation. Hey, let me just share what, my perspective on this whole thing was. A week ago, you wanted to sell. And now we've experienced this. And so what's changed? You don't want it to be about what's changed with the listing period, like, hey, the buyer came and then the buyer went. You want to focus on what's changed for them in their financial world and their, their feelings or whatever, because the whether she's going to list again or not should be based on something internally, not externally. Okay, what other topics do you guys want to cover today? Any other specific questions? And then I can talk about a few things I want to chat about. We're looking for seller dilemmas. What can we do to help each other get more comfortable in navigating the seller process? Anyone?
I would like if we could talk about a little bit about how you would bring up with a seller, or how you'd even put that in there of a like a lease back contingency, kind of, not a contingency, but like if they're worried, like that they need to close and whatnot, and we say, okay, well, here you could probably stay in your home for another 15 days, 30 days, whatever it may be. Like
Okay,
how
so the seller
how
is worried
work.
that they'll have to move out at closing, and then if the closings don't align with their purchase, then they won't have a place to live and they'll have to store their stuff elsewhere or whatever. That?
Yeah, all that.
Okay, so I mean the downside of that is it's hard to make promises, right? Because the buyer may not be interested in that, right?
Well, I know it
So-
wouldn't work all the time. I'm just saying, like, now it seems like it's more common.
It is. It definitely is.
So how do you talk about that, and how do you do that, and how much time could you really ask for, I guess is my question.
Okay, great questions. Okay, so first of all, I probably wouldn't bring it up necessarily unless it's brought up. There's no need to create more stress around the transaction than you don't want to make them stressed out about something they aren't actually stressed out about, right? So I would only deal with this really if they bring it up. And what I would say is, look, everything is negotiable. So when we get an offer, or hopefully when we get multiple offers, we have a chance to go back to all the agents and all the buyers and let them know what the most important things to us are. Okay. So your job and perhaps our job together is to determine what the most important things are, right? So maybe it's highest sales price, lowest closing cost, shortest due diligence, quickest closing. It could be the lease back. I'll explain the lease back for everyone in 1 second. So you basically have a little list that ideally you've created with the seller to say, hey, when we get an offer, we're going to respond back by letting the buyer know, hopefully multiple buyers know, that these are the things that are most important to us. So if you would like to stay in the home 2 weeks after you close, then it's negotiable. However, you got to get the buyer to agree to that. And the buyer may only want to agree to that if they get something, in return, so to speak, right? Now, what we've seen is that buyers are willing to do that stuff pretty frequently because it's a very strong seller's market. You're under no obligation to accept an offer that doesn't include that if you don't choose to, right? So everything is a negotiation. So what Ryan is asking is basically buyer goes under contract to buy a seller's home. Let's say 30 days go by roughly, and the deal closes. More often than not, the property exchange, or the what's the word I'm looking for? what's the word I'm looking for? When basically when you hand the keys to them at closing, occupation, right? When that generally happens at the closing. If, for example, the seller wants to stay in the home for, let's say, 2 weeks, and like in Ryan's example, then that can be negotiated. I would say in general, if it's less than a week of time period, there's generally not money exchanged. Okay. Once it goes over, maybe even 4 or 5 days up, there generally is money exchanged. And the money exchanged is generally the cost that the buyer has, taxes, insurance, mortgage, interest, all that, to own the home that the sellers are still living in. Now, one of the things that the buyer could do is, say, hey, we won't ask for you to give us any money back. We'll own the home, we'll pay for it. You just live in it for 2 weeks. That's more advantageous to the seller, obviously. So again, that can be negotiated. Now, most lenders will state that if the buyer, the primary purchaser, or I'm sorry, the primary occupant of the home, like the person that's going to move in, they get a special interest rate when they are the principal resident, right? It's their home, as opposed to buying an investment property. If they don't move in 60 days, then oftentimes the lender can come back and say, whoa, you said this was your primary residence and you hadn't moved in yet. What's going on here? Is this mortgage fraud? Right? So generally you see that time period is no more than 59 days. Now, if it's a cash purchaser, it doesn't make a difference. Make sense? All right, is that clear for everybody? Okay, cool. Let's do one more, and then I'll do one.
Bill, I have a question around that.
Yeah.
I actually, it was a cash offer, so it didn't matter. But if it weren't a cash offer, I want to know if it would matter. I wrote an offer where we said the seller could live in the house for 59 days and then have the option, if needed, to rent for up to 4 months after. Would that affect the interest? Because it would be a short-term lease post.
Well, short-term lease is that's the problem part. That every lender might look at that slightly differently. Some might be more, that may become more problematic with some lenders and maybe less with others.
Okay.
Right. Could you get away with it? Yeah, I'm sure there's people that have gotten away with that. Could it cause, could it become a whole lot more ugly? Yeah, it probably could.
Oh, okay.
Right. Because if you are in violation, so to speak, I mean, they could call the loan due. And the only way you're going to be able to pay it is most likely by selling the property. Right.
Yeah.
So it could get really, really ugly. I do not recommend that.
Okay. But you could do it on an all cash offer and be okay.
That's right. Well, there's no loan, so it doesn't make a difference.
Okay.
So when you buy a home for cash, you're not obligated to share with anyone, is this going to be an investment home or a primary residence or an Airbnb or whatever? No, you've got the money, so you make the decisions. When you're asking the lender for the money, they get to make the decisions.
Right.
Yeah. And plus that it doesn't give your client a lot of freedom. You're giving all the control to the tenant. Right? Oh, wait, I see what you're saying. You're on the seller side. Right? You there?
I think she's on the buyer side.
Yeah, she said that it was a cash offer, so I think she was the buyer side.
I was the buyer's side.
Yeah, what I don't particularly like about that scenario is that for the next 60 days, this person has no idea whether they're going to be able to move into their home. Like they are not in control.
But this was a special. They're out of state. They're not moving here for a year.
Oh, okay.
That's why we had the flexibility.
Flexibility will vary, and situations will vary. In most circumstances, I would not like that plan. In your situation where they're a year away from moving into town, it pretty much doesn't make a difference.
And I got one other question.
Yeah.
So if I bought a house and I lived there, you know, get my mortgage, I lived there for a year, and then I decide I want to rent it.
Great question. Very good question. Thank you for bringing that up. So the issue is when there appears to be evidence that there was deceit, right?
Okay.
So oftentimes if the mortgage company were to come back and say, hey, a year ago you bought this home as a principal residence and now you're renting it, like you might have to explain to them what's happened. Maybe there was a change in family situation, or maybe there was a change in job, or some type of economic pandemic perhaps. I don't know. Like it's a lot of gray area there.
Okay.
Okay. But as long as you're like, so we have a little condo in north side of Sandy Springs, and I bought it as a primary residence, lived there for a couple of years, and then we've rented it out since. So I didn't, like, when I moved from it, nobody actually called me and said, hey, we're sending the tax bill to somewhere else now. What's going on with that? Right? Nobody followed up with that at all. Right? And I didn't call them and say, hey, by the way, this is a investment property now, so I'd like for you to raise my interest rate. Right? That obviously didn't happen.
Okay.
So it is some gray area. Don't be afraid to ask, every situation if you need to. But in general, I like my clients to have control. Just like I want to have control, so I want them to have control.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Or at least have some added protections. Okay, let me talk about one. Angela, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, Bill, if you could do one more scenario, that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Kind of piggybacking off with Greta, but when you are selling a property where you have a tenant in it, like, do you do, hey, no showings until it's under contract? Like, what's the best way to make sure, obviously, the tenant still has a good experience with, and the seller does as well? That would be really helpful.
This is a tenant whose lease is about to expire, basically?
Yes, yep. Or
Okay.
you could sell it with the lease, I guess. So I'm
Yeah.
open to any kind of scenario there.
Okay, so let's assume, so most leases, well, I shouldn't say most leases, but I would say the vast majority of leases are somewhere in the 30 to 60 day notice neighborhood, right? So the tenant and the owner get together 30 days from the end of the lease or 60 days from the end of the lease, and the owner basically generally says, hey, would you like to renew? And if so, here's your new price. Or go ahead and tell me now that you don't want to renew, so we can go about showings. In the GAR form lease, the one that I would always put in there, once notice is given, the tenant is now agreed to reasonable showings of 24-hour notice. Okay. Now, before I understand that, but I also want to see what my prospects are going to see. So generally, when that call comes in, I'll call the tenant, right, and say, hey, my name is Bill. I'm with Keller Williams. I'm going to be working with Mr. Merritt to get the property re-rented. And I just wanted to get an opportunity to meet you and to go over a couple of quick things and to see the home. Would that be okay? Right. Then I go and see the home. If it's an absolute wreck, right, you need new this and new that, and you got stains in the carpet and the place. Hey, give me just 1 second. The place is a wreck, and they're like a hoarder or something. It's just not a good presentation of the home. Then I'd probably go back to the seller or the owner and say, hey, I think we need to get this guy out and then prep it and then get it back on the market. Okay, so that's one particular scenario. The other scenario is I enter into a very cordial and very nice, much nicer than usual, right, when I'm dealing with the tenant, because they are going to make this or break this for me, right? They're either going to agree to keep the home, nice and clean and dishes done and beds made and all that kind of stuff and make the home ready to go, or they're going to fight me every step of the way. I can't do that because it's raining. I can't do that because I'm not home, whatever. Some tenants are really hard to deal with and some are amazing. So regardless of what any of the paperwork says, you got to figure out, do I have a good relationship with the tenant? And then how would you like me to alert you when we have showing requests? Oh, just text me. Okay, great. So I'll do my best to do 24 hours. That's not always the way that requests come in. If I get the request, I'll share it with you, and just do me a favor. Just do the best you can, okay? Right. And generally when you ask somebody to do that, they overperform, right? And so every once in a while you may get a showing that is denied, but the vast majority of them, the tenant will make themselves available. And I'll say, hey, my preference would be for you just to take a step, just leave the house for a couple minutes, walk the dog, go to the gym, go out, get a drink or whatever, and then come back, and I can let you know when the showing's over. Because if they're there, the future tenant is going to say, hey, what's the deal with this landlord? Is he a nice guy? Right? Does he replace things when things break? Right? Is he respectful? Right? These kind of things. Not that, I mean, if they're a bad person, I'm not going to work with them in the first place, but I don't need that. We don't need to go there. Make sense? So the key to your question is, how am I getting along with the tenant, and what condition is the home currently in? Cool. And just like with sellers, when the home is listed, ideally the seller / the tenant should not be there for showings. Because let me tell you something, if your seller is there for showings, the buyer's agent is like, are you good? Hey, congratulations. All right, I'm going to call you in a minute, okay? The buyer's agent's like, ooh, I can't wait to ask some good questions to this person. And they will tell you stuff that you should not know, that you will use against them within the negotiations, right? Oh, we just need 275 for the home and we'll be good. Oh, really? Okay. We just saved 20 grand. What do you know? See what I'm saying? Okay, let me just say one last thing real fast. We have talked a bit about this, and I'll post a link for this in the chat, or the download in the chat. There's something called a pre-listing package, right? I know Dustin's talked a lot about that last week, and his session was on that. I cannot stress to you enough how important that is. Okay, the pre-listing package is something that generally happens in between the pre-qualification and the appointment itself. Okay, if you have enough time. By the way, if it's preferable not to have like an immediate listing appointment, right? So if somebody were to call me today and say, hey, can we do a listing? Can you show me what you're all about? Come list the home, or come interview to list the home. I don't want to do it like at lunch today. I don't have enough time to prep, right? I want to see some other homes. I want to do some calculations. I want to put my presentation together. So I'm going to try to get it like maybe tomorrow afternoon, something like that, so I can get a little prep time. Right. The other thing is, when you send over this material, it is basically pre-selling you. Most likely no other agent that they might be interviewing is doing that. And it causes you not to have to be at the appointment for 3 hours. Right. I'm going to send you over some material. Would you mind taking a look at it before our meeting? Right. And the material talks a little bit about the market, talks a little bit about you and your team, or your organization, or Keller Williams. Talks a little bit about a marketing plan, right? It kind of gives a little resume, if you will. And it also includes some testimonials. So I'm going to post a really pretty version of that, so you guys can see some examples. It also generally has evidence of success, meaning like sold this home for 102% of list price in 2 days, and sold that home for 99.5% of list price in 4 days. Now you're saying to yourself, well, I hadn't sold any homes. Guess what? The seller doesn't know what's supposed to be in the pre-listing package. So if they get a pre-listing package and it doesn't have a bunch of evidence of success, it's okay. They don't get the pre-listing package and say, oh, when I was in Keller Williams, they taught us to put evidence of success in here, and I don't see any evidence of success. That will never happen. Okay. Got it? So that way you, and remember the critical question or critical comment that you make at the end of the pre-qualification questions is, just so you know, our meeting will last somewhere between 45 minutes to an hour, or 30 to 45 minutes. Will that be okay? Because if you set that expectation, it goes an hour and 15 minutes and the seller's like, what's this dude still doing in my house? I got other things to do. Right. And you now have permission, if you will, to go hang out with someone else because you've already done your piece. Does that make sense? If you don't help them understand how long everything's going to take, in some ways it's disrespectful to them because you're not helping them understand how long they're going to be there. They got kids to pick up and dinner to make and kids to put to bed. They don't want a realtor hanging out. They just want to know what the price is and where to sign, right? You don't need to tell them your entire professional work history. You should basically be talking almost nothing about you. You've already sent that information. The appointment should be all about them. You guys kind of follow how that works a little bit? Okay, so maybe we'll do another session next week, just a bit more detail on the pre-listing and where you guys can come up with some more listing type scenarios. And by the way, if you just post the listing scenario or buyer scenario, whatever you ever, anytime you want anything, and I can record just a voicemail, WhatsApp thing, answering those questions. Okay. Thank you guys for being on great behavior over the last 2 days while I was away, and congratulations on to all of those that have taken new listings and listings are about to hit the market and closings. I love seeing it. If you have not updated through the first 3 weeks of September, that would be fantastic, either on the dual sheet or on the results page. And I will, kwroswelltraining.com is where Candace is right now, about to teach agent fundamentals. If you've not taken that, I highly recommend that you take it. And then at our office today from 1:30 to 3, we have a top producers mastermind with Aubrey. That's people that have had 8 or more transactions, and a becoming a top producer mastermind with Robin. That is also today. Aubrey's is 1:30 to 3 and Robin's is 3 to 4. That's 0 to 7 transactions. So if you fall into one of those two, which you mathematically would have to, you can attend the appropriate one. And then we have a little social function today at Hola. Is that right? All right. I'll see you guys soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks.